Hello, everyone. Um, this is intended to be a follow up to the previous discussion, and perhaps in the last episode, I went on too many tangents and didn't really cover what was intended to be covered. So now I'm gonna try to do this one while being more so clear headed, and try to clarify or elucidate the contents of my own profile. Uh, as I go on to talk to others and try to ask them and find out where they come from, how they came to do what they do, and what they basically plan to do with the activity that they engage in. What is the end goal of the pursuit that they're engaged in, basically. But before me going on about asking them, it would probably be only fair if the audience knew equally or as well about the host regarding these questions. So I basically set up here 4 points that I gotta cover. First one being where I come from. Well, I'm a first generation immigrant to Canada. Came to Canada with family from Central Asia when I was 9 years old. A kid. So went through started in elementary school, went through junior high and high school right here in Canada, in the East Coast, in the province of Nova Scotia. So the East Coast is where I basically was nurtured, and most of my friends, most of what I was exposed to, most of what I came across, learned about, it all occurred in the East Coast. So even to this day, even though I'm not in the East Coast right now, majority of my social social connections are present in the East Coast. So I guess my intention nowadays would be to try to unchart for myself different parts of the world in order to find out what I could, in order to find out what could be beneficial, useful, and what could provide an opportunity for me of some sort, but also how I could be of benefit to others or to some things in places different from the East Coast of Canada. So yeah, that's basically where I've been born and nurtured. Next is concerning my political views. How did I come across my political views? Well, I guess back in high school, I had seen references to Ron Paul and many other politicians, but it's wasn't passing very vaguely, and I was in high school, grade 10, 11, and even perhaps before that. I mean, if my knowledge of politics, economics, etc., is to be considered superficial now, it was, you know, certainly and definitely superficial then. You know, so so I had heard about these people, and I've also always had the tendency or the proclivity, the predisposition to want to prefer something that is not popular. You know, so I have always whatever the majority of people had pressured me to do, had whatever patterns that I had observed the majority of individuals striving towards. Uh, Now, by the mere sake of it being that popular, for some reason, that for some reason, I had the inclination within myself to want to resist going down that similar stream. And so, concerning my political views, of course, growing up in Canada, majority of people, at least in the urban areas, majority of people are left leaning, right, in the conventional sense. And they're big supporters of Trudeau, and our healthcare system is awesome, and we're all about multiculturalism and diversity, and we're pro immigration, and we're against we're against discrimination and racism. We're all for toleration, etc., etc., etc. Right? But the thing is, when you really observe these political views, especially on university campuses, but perhaps in society in general, and the way we promote diversity seems that in most of it, perhaps almost entirely, we are caught up in diversity in how it's implied by the sense as it refers to the skin tone of the people concerned, or rather than their skin tone, their physical features being something that is not being of any consideration. Rather, it's all about their character, their objectivity, as to the extent that they can try to be rational and logical with the information that's presented to them, and not buy everything, not buy everything just because that was the first idea that they were presented with, but rather to try to take that and compare and contrast with what others are saying before hastening to come to a conclusion. Well, that's not what most people do, of course. Most people are are in the herd mentality. That seems to be the common way most people go about these things, right? I mean, just because multiculturalism and diversity is popular nowadays, that's what the majority of people support. Not because they have objectively and analyzed and assessed the pros and cons or the supposed virtues of this sentiment, which thereby they have come to the conclusion that this is the best opinion or ideology to promote. But rather, they just stick up their finger in the air and see which way the wind is going, right? So, but I mean, by this sense, if this is all what the majority of people are saying, then it don't matter what the popular sentiment or ideology be. I mean, it could be as is now, diversity or multiculturalism, but it could have also been racism and supremacy of some particular race, or it could have been religious theology. It could have been uh, communism, right? Then the average person, because because they're not really taking what they hear and really trying to get at the core of it to try to see if it's actually plausible and acceptable to their own moral and ethical principles. this basically gives us the case that the average person is willing to agree uh, to whatever the popular sentiment is at face value. So I mentioned Ron Paul, and but I think what got me to thinking more about politics, but especially from the economic perspective, which is very important because only the other thing I forgot to mention is I'm actually a political science major, and I chose this program because I was never good at math, and in high school I did terrible in subjects that required numbers and formulas, and but I also sort of had the observation that most of these students who were good at these kinds of subjects, it's not that they're really absorbing and accumulating, assimilating that information into their body of knowledge that they now possess, but rather it's learned by rote, and then they try to retain it only for the temporary period of time before they got to regurgitate it back on the test or on the exam, and then after that, it's oblivious to their mind. They don't retain that knowledge anymore. But anyway, so my weaknesses in certain subjects led me to want to pick a subject that perhaps I had a shot in. But I wasn't sure what that was going to be because at one point in time I could never see myself attending a university because I had actually dropped out of high school. I think it was in the second semester, grade 12, and I just went and traveled, and I just had to, I just needed time off from studying, I guess, and just to figure out what I want to do with my life. But I guess I came back around, and I wanted to, you know, ended up going back to university, or going to university, getting the requisites that I needed, and getting the high school diploma from an adult high school. And I got the diploma. I applied to university, and it was not easy because from going from an adult high school to a university was a significant leap. But I came to get a hang of things. I guess this is how it sort of works out with almost any activity, or any activity that you could engage in, is that once you get the fundamentals down, once you get the basic lessons down, as you advance and develop in this certain activity or endeavor, you get to personalize how you do it in the way that best matches your own predispositions, right? So, let's say, for example, you pick up a sort of a martial art, right? Let's say you pick up judo or wrestling, right? Or even, let's say, soccer. You train for a decade, train, practice, and play on the team competitively. But eventually, you get to find out what style of the sport best matches your physical capabilities, right? So let's say because of your weight, because of the length of your legs or the length of your arms, because of etc., and you seem to have found that this style of martial art best matches your physical capabilities. This style of judo or this style of wrestling, and you try to, direct the boat of your development in that direction. Or even in soccer, right? Let's say you have two players and you train them intensely for a decade. Even if you put them exactly through the same sort of training, likely they will not end up as soccer players of same position, right? One could end up being a left winger, and another could end up being a right back, right? This is all dependent upon the person concerning their physical characteristics, but also with the I guess with the intellectual activities that one could engage in, whether let's say let's say concerning liberal arts, you come to study sociology, economics, and something like that. Now, there's obviously a wide array of disciplines, even within one subject, that you could try to target and focus more closely. But you find amongst that wide variety one particular sliver that really interests you, or not only in that sense, but also perhaps a certain school of thought, a certain school of approach that you could take to learn further of learn further of the information and the knowledge that this field of study gotta provide. But concerning the intellectual arts, another way in which a pupil could differ from another pupil is perhaps how they express themselves. Let's say you train both students for 2 decades, 1 decade and 2 decades in the study of economics, right? So you get to see, perhaps this person is more interested in monetary theory, and this person is interested more so in something else, healthcare or something. But the thing is, not only in the subject that they find most interesting and that they occupy most of their time studying and writing about, but also in the way they write about their subjects. There's a distinction. There's a particular sort of style that best expresses them as a person. I forget where I was going with that, but let me get back on point. So 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 I'm a political science major, and I understand why people may think that it's a useless time and effort, wasted on on a degree that could probably land me a job nowheres. I mean, that's a point taken, and I understand that to be a legitimate point. But for me right now, most importantly, as a person in my early 20s, I'm in the pursuit of knowledge, and my consideration of my career is something I'm delaying for later. And perhaps this is an incorrect approach. Perhaps I should have just, seen what career option would have been most lucrative, right? Let's say, I could go to a trade school, get a diploma in 18 or 24 months, and get work, right? Get my hands dirty, and and pocket the check, right? But for me, it's hard for me to find the motivation to do something, to be engaged in something, unless I find an adequate reason to be doing that. And and my biggest motivator in that sense has been curiosity. So I need to go the way, go the route of trying to satiate this desire to know. And so that's what I have been after. And I'm interested in various subjects: politics, philosophy, economics, spirituality. And so, but if I was to just be focused on what the best career option would be, then this is basically subordinating my interests, my interests in various intellectual subjects, as a secondary, as like a part-time hobby. But I want I want to put in more time and effort in order to learn more about them and learn more about them and meet people who are like-minded, right? And this is another reason for starting up something like this, a podcast, is to be able to meet like-minded people. You know, and because I think if you are an eccentric individual, and that is not meant at all in the derogatory sense, but eccentric meaning different from the majority, different in the sense that your predispositions, your proclivities, seem to want to deviate from whatever the conventional patterns of your society is. In that sense, you will feel like an outcast. You'll feel like you don't belong, and and that you may find the need to want to go out in the world and try to find people who observe the world similarly to you, right? And it's not really easy to find that sort of people. I mean, yes, perhaps you could even accumulate a bunch of friends or so-called friends, but are you really close with them? Is your friendship with them sincere and genuine? That's I guess that's a mood question, right? But again, going off on another tangent, let me get back here to my political views, and I put down libertarianism. And I had mentioned earlier how how I started to take economics into consideration when trying to assess political issues and debates, topics, or subjects. Is that I was watching Joe Rogan, and it was episode 1002, and I recommend all of you to check it out. One of my favorite episodes of Joe Rogan, and it really, this man, his guest on that episode, Peter Schiff, really delivers a smack of common sense. And then I had to go about trying to find out what approach, what perspective this man was taking, and it was the approach of the Austrian School of Economics. And this is a school of thought that's neglected on university campuses. I mean, the intellectual giants that come out of this tradition, Ludwig von Mises, Murray Rothbard, Thomas Woods, which I'm reading the book of now, Walter Block, and Hans Hermann Hoppe, and even before them, somebody like Friedrich Bastiat. But the thing is, by studying in a university, you're most likely not going to stumble upon any other names or any other arguments. If you do come across some of the arguments of theirs, or arguments from their side of free market, it's going to be a straw man argument. I mean, the most that I've ever heard mentioned was Milton Friedman. He was mentioned a couple of times in the economics textbooks when I was taking an introductory course. Who's a professor of the Chicago School of Economics, so that's a different school. And over there's they're basically fine with having a central bank, and they just want the rate of inflation to be more predictable, as I understand it. And also, when I was taking an international relations course, it was the section of the course when we were going to talk about the Bretton Woods event, right, which set up the monetary standards for some part of the 20th century. And in that documentary that was presented to us in that class at University of Manitoba, John Maynard Keynes was talked about because, of course, he was a major figure in that point in history, that period in history, I should say, and his rival was this man named Friedrich Hayek, F.H. Hayek. So I searched up some of these people, and I was really intrigued because, as I told you earlier, I'm not good with numbers, and whenever the subject of economics came into consideration, I was just intimidated because I thought the math was just going to be beyond me, and I wouldn't have been able to understand it, and it was just going to be, like a textbook of Chinese grammar. That's just how I felt when I took a geometry course, which was a big debacle, which resulted in me having to rearrange my plans in life by at least a little bit, at least for a year or two. But this Austrian approach was totally different. They did not intend to use numbers or the approach of positivism and trying to take the scientific approach of getting X and Y variables and coming to a certain conclusion, having a controlled group and stuff like that. This approach basically says that conventional approach is invalid because you can't really apply and use that approach effectively when it comes to society, because you can't really have variables and control them and coerce them. It just doesn't work. It doesn't give you a fair, accurate representation of what's actually occurring on the ground. So, this approach to economics takes an approach that's more closely associated with one's perhaps closer to philosophy or sociology. For example, Mises himself, if I'm not mistaken, was once described as being a literary economist. You open up the book of Mises or Rothbard, it ain't diagrams, and it ain't charts and graphs and none of that stuff. It's just nonfiction book. I mean, some parts of it maybe, when you get to the nitty gritty of the epistemology and etc. It is going to get a little bit challenging. But the approach they take is fundamentally different, and the conclusions they come to are different because there are certain principles that they are adhering to and trying to do that consistently. One being the non-aggression principle, which is central to the viewpoint of libertarianism, which would take you to a whole approach that is not only economic but also philosophical, ethical. And so, what libertarianism intends to do is take those principles that are consistent and effective in economics, in ethics, but also as applied socially. But anyways, yeah, that's what I had to say about my political views. And let's see how much time I got here. 30 minutes. Let me. Next part, I was going to talk about my philosophical views. Or perhaps, the one following that is my spiritual views. Perhaps I should go like this. Talk about another part of my personal history. When I was, so about 5 to 6 years from now, would that have been 5 to 6 years? About 2013 or 2014 is when I basically decided to leave religion. And the reason I left religion was perhaps a curious one, because I actually had a phase with nationalism, and through nationalism, I left religion. Because nationalism for me has served as an antidote against religious dogma. But then later on in my life, I basically ended up denouncing nationalism as well. And I actually go on to elaborate about that in the second video that I had posted on this channel. You guys should check it out. It's my paper for a course that I took recently. It was called Canadian Political Thought. And I presented this paper, and I actually submitted a little bit late, but I guess the teacher liked it enough that she still gave me A-. So thank you her for that. Thanks to her for that, because I guess my views in there are not completely conforming to the popular standards of social justice, politically correct university standards. Yeah, so my religion was Islam, and you see, I for the majority of religious people, your religion is basically inherited from your parents, right? Let's say your father was a rich man. He held some estate, and he passed away, and then you get to possess it. But I guess that could be considered something of benefit to you, and you could try to say, oh, I could try to use that land in this way, or I could try to sell it. Yeah, perhaps that could be beneficial to you. But how about if you were to inherit something that you didn't necessarily want, but it was still imposed upon you? And that's what basically religion is. Just because you were born a Muslim, born a Christian, maybe not Christians all over the world, but society expects you to just commit to it, accept it, embrace it. But why? I never chose it, right? Consider this. And I had told this to a colleague of mine who came over to Canada from India. Let's say, this person was born in Punjab region of India, and of course, as the majority of people who come from Punjab, they're of the Sikh religion, right? So this person I was talking with, they had told me that they date somebody that is a Hindu. Her boyfriend was a Hindu, and her roommate was a Muslim, right? But I said something in response. I don't know if she completely got it. I don't know if it registered, if it just went over her head. But the thing is, I said, don't you find it strange that there are certain things that you gotta follow and do at certain times and certain days and certain activities you gotta be engaged in a certain, you know, book of rules that you gotta follow, while your boyfriend does his own sort of stuff and your roommate does his own sort of stuff. For the most part, doesn't this shit seem arbitrary? Does it not? Because those things do not necessarily determine the quality of a person. You know, uh, whether you were to, if you were to assess them as being a good or bad person. So I came to realize that it is not these systems of practical faith that determines the quality of a person, but there are certain moral principles that should be held universally. Universally, that means wherever you go on planet Earth, wherever you go, there could be no um, dislike, or they could not be regarded as being reprehensible in any way. They could only be worthy of honor. Something like being honest, being sincere, being consistent, being frugal, being this sort of stuff. Now, I had written a paper about this too. This was for in philosophy course. We had looked at the work of Immanuel Kant, deontology in particular, and so perhaps I will post a reading of that paper too soon. And regarding those papers, I just want you guys to approach it as being an ebook, basically, and just listen to it. For me, if I hear somebody reading something, unless I'm following the lines with them, I can't really. It doesn't really register. So if somebody's reading something to me, I need the text in front of me so I could follow what they're reading. So that's why I'm reading it right down my. I'm basically sharing my screen with you, and I'm reading it and trying to express it in the way that it most personally affects me. All right, just a second. Hopefully the mic was working. I think it is. Yeah, so I just wanted to say that I happen to be an apostate for 6 or 7 years now. But also, there was an apostates sort of social group, ex-MNA, ex-Muslims of North America, social group, right? For people who had left this 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 heck of a religion, and they're basically fleeing for their life. They're scared of being ostracized or even hurt physically, right? And if you're in the Middle East or in some other countries in Asia, that's certainly be the case. But the thing is, I hung out there for a while, but I ceased to see a point in me remaining to be there. Not that I had developed a newfound affection for the religion of Islam. That's not the case. The point is that let's say you had cancer, right? And you're recovering from cancer, right? You're going through chemotherapy, and you find a social group of others who are in a similar situation. Let's say you eventually completely recover from it, and and you hang around there still for a year or two. But let's say a decade passes by, 2 decades passes by. Do you really still got a point in hanging out there? Hanging out there? I mean, cancer is for you a history from your past, not from the recent past, but past from 2 decades ago. So that's how I felt. There was no point for me anymore in hanging out with these apostates because I don't got that issue anymore. I don't got that cancer anymore, you know? I mean, my parents, my family is aware that I'm an apostate. And of course, they were shocked in the beginning, but nobody can be shocked permanently, right? So, and if you do something astonishing uh, as that, for parents or for people who are committed to tradition, is that if you try to commit to showing yourself uh, by if you commit to showing yourself by committing to sorry if you commit to presenting yourself by good thoughts, good deeds, and good action, right? Then you do not need some religious affiliation to be able to present to somebody that you are a person of goodwill. And that's what basically is most important. Sorry, guys, there's so many tangents, and my train of thoughts it just goes off in various directions. But what I wanted to say about my colleague is, so let's say this person was born in Punjab, but if they had been born, you know, a couple miles to the west, or a couple tens of miles to the west, they would have been born a Muslim. Couple tens of miles to the east, they would have born a Hindu. So, and if this person happened to be a devoted member of the religion, then they would have been just as devoted if they were born in a different place, you know, even just in that radius, geographically. So it's really arbitrary what religion you affiliate with, unless of course you're a recent convert, and that makes the case different. But still, I'm skeptical of converts. But the difference being is that you were an adult and you come to investigate a certain religion. You come to accept it by consent, right? But for the majority of people, especially in the Islamic world, that was something just inherited, something that was inherited from their family. They had no choice in it, and perhaps they did not even want to inherit it, but rather it was imposed upon them. And let's say in the Middle East countries, you can't even leave. The penalty is death. So yeah. Just a minute. So but another thing I should refer to is regarding children and the religious indoctrination that they may possibly go through, is that is a point made by Richard Dawkins in his book The God Delusion. He said that children should not be referred to as being members of certain religion, and I think this is very true. And just like how feminists get angered if a person does not use the right sort of language, saying mankind and stuff. So Richard Dawkins was making the point that we should not refer to children as being Christian children or Muslim children or Hindu children. Instead, we should say children of Muslim parents, children of Christian parents. So this basically disconnects whatever dogma that the parents or the minds that the parents are trapped in from the actual child. So it's only fair for them to want to get to full consciousness and capacity for reason before accepting to anything significant as religion. So after I had left the dogma of Islam, I had nearly become an atheist. I was basically an agnostic, leaning more so towards atheism. But then that all changed, and that is the part or the role that just a minute. That is the part where Joe Rogan, through his podcast, had influenced me. Especially concerning entheogens, and I would consider marijuana as being one of them. But also the psychedelics, right? So through my own experimentation with them, I guess I could regard myself as a psychonaut. I came to a newfound belief in higher power, in God, in divinity. But I guess my conception of divinity differs, yet still, from the religious people. But you got to consider, right? Actually, some comedian was talking about this, but I guess this comedian's words, I forget his name, but this comedian's words should be taken with more serious consideration. That is that they say the first time that Moses spoke to God, it was with him standing, standing right in front of a burning bush. And if the bush was burning, could he have possibly inhaled any of the fumes coming off that bush, right? And could that have caused any sort of hallucination that he may have interpreted a certain way, for his capacity for knowledge and understanding? And since the vision that he's exposed to is so abstract, he comes up with, with this book, with this text, with this sentiment, and either he transcribes it or he tells people about it, and they jot it down. And then through generations and generations, you just hope that whatever was initially interpreted from this very first vision was somewhat accurate, right? But that, of course, is dubiously the case because bastardization is endemic to the human race. We humans, it's difficult for us to retain something in its original form, in its pure form. And actually, there was a game we used to play as kids, and Richard Dawkins talks about it in his book too. It's called The Telephone. 10 kids sit by one another, and one of them whispers something to the ears of another, and they just go down the line and see what the last person thinks, what the word or what the sentence is about. And it's usually the case that it comes to have a different form, right? It comes to entail something else, something more or something less. But now think about this regarding supposed religious truth. Don't you think it's also the case that things could have been added, things could have been subtracted, and ultimately that the original form ceases to be, that what you have now is an admixture of the supposed initial interpretation of the first vision with an addition of numerous other interpretations by generations subsequent to the initial prophet. So yeah, so that's one point to consider, and regarding my philosophical views, I wanted to mention two names, but perhaps I should elaborate on them at least a little bit. In political theory class, we were assigned to read The Republic by Plato. Now, for me, regarding the political views of Plato, I do not know if I certainly do not agree, strongly opposed. But perhaps it is not to be understood in the literal sense, just as perhaps a Christian or a Jew would look at the text of the Old Testament. They would not necessarily take it to be completely literal, but take it to be symbolic or or providing a lesson of some sort. But for me, when Plato talked about the tripartite soul, the allegory of the caves, the theory of forms, that was really profound. That was really profound, and and I had written a paper, and it should be up on the channel soon, about when I tried to compare the views regarding the soul and the spirit of Plato to the ideas presented by substance dualism in the works of French philosopher René Descartes. Descartes with his famous statement, "I think, therefore I am." Yeah, it was exactly that. He came to conclude that him being able to think is the only thing that he knows for certain, and everything else, since there is room for doubt, it is to be eliminated completely because he does not know of its certainty completely. Yeah, so both Plato and Descartes are individuals who take a person to possess a higher self, a self that is more than his corporeal self. That is, basically the body is being perceived as a vehicle for the spirit or the soul that is in some sense driving it, or is it entrapped in it? The soul being trapped in the vehicle that is the body. This is especially the view, if I'm not mistaken, that most closely aligns with that of Pythagoras, which is another ancient Greek philosopher. So, anyways, guys, that's some of the things I wanted to share with you about my own worldview. But I don't know if I made clear the purpose of starting a podcast, because just in this episode alone, there are a whole lot of tangents. So if I happen to be a little hazy-minded at the moment, or, as it was the case in the previous episode, then perhaps the frequency of tangents just increases. But anyways, what I wanted to say was podcasting gives a person the opportunity to network, to find like-minded people, and you just got to put the content out there. You know, the numbers could accumulate. If it is to accumulate, but without the effort, you can never find out the results. But without the adequate amount of effort, you can never find out the result. Perhaps there's a threshold of some sort, um, based on the amount of content you put out or the amount of effort you put in, and then as time progresses, there is a threshold that you will exceed, which you will then happen to find yourself being able to ignite or spark the momentum that can just take your channel, or take your work to basically accelerate the pace of its growth and expose its potential. And yeah, another thing mentioned was by Gary Vee, which I had mentioned in the previous episode, of saying that you just got to commit to it, and perhaps it won't be until like episode 96 where your channel takes off. And so I gotta keep at this thing, even though school's coming up in a couple of weeks, and I still got a full-time job, and even with that being the case, I gotta find the time to do this. I gotta assign it to myself as homework, basically, and hopefully people will be curious enough to hear me out and to discuss and converse about some of these things. And the other thing, another thing that was mentioned in the previous episode was to start before one was ready, and that was another advice given by one of the YouTubers, and I'm certainly doing that because obviously I'm less than ready, considering that I got no name for myself yet, and also considering that I got a very little means in order to produce this sort of content. Understandably, I'm a student on a restricted budget, right? Trying to pay off his expenses, tuition and rent, and etc., all by borrowing not a dime in student loans. So, I mean, it required considerable effort, especially working a part-time job. It does test your patience, to say the least. Anyways, I hope that I was able to clarify for you some of my own viewpoints, and we hope to have some guests on here, and hopefully this starts to catch on eventually, and the algorithm works in our favor. Does its work auspiciously, propitiously, and like-minded people will come our way, and we get to discuss and learn and teach and exchange ideas and knowledge we may have acquired wherever it may have been. Because one more point I want to make about religion is that religions claim to basically hold a monopoly on the truth. This is the one and true way, the only one and only true way. But I disagree with that claim. Rather, I find truth and wisdom to be dispersed within this world, within this realm, and the wisdom seeker, the curious person, ought to go out and try to accumulate them, try to collect them, and try to form a more whole worldview. But anyways, guys, I hope that was an interesting rant to listen to. And we're still hoping to get 2 guests on this week, but that would be the most ideal case. Because again, the viewership is low and the subscriber count is low, so people are not very considerate of the invitations coming their way. But hopefully we can get the channel growing. So like, share, subscribe, and I will call it an episode right here. So that is 60 minutes long. That's a decent length.